Mr. MVN Rao, Chief Learning Officer for 𝗚𝗏 Limited. He is leading the Global Learning OD Leadership Development, Technical Engineering and Leadership Academies to deliver learning and development in a line with the business strategy and expectations to build a high-performing and sustainable corporation. On that note, I would like to request to please come on the stage, sir.
I think that was a wonderful presentation, Mr. Pandian. I'm sure the way you projected how learning will grow and learning will move and how learning can earn its pride of place, I think is wonderfully enunciated. Thank you very much. No, interestingly, I'm not a very thoroughbred learning professional, so I don't want to venture into the areas where many of these people who are actually sponsoring will talk about their research. And I'm sure you must be bombarded with messages and mails about what learning leaders should do and X and Y and so on and so forth. I have been a people professional for many years, and as the Chief Learning Officer, the one question that is asked to me every day is by my business leader is, what do you guys do? Why you're not able to retain people? Why we are not able to keep the people? Why people still keep saying learning opportunities are few? Why people keep saying career opportunities are not there? And at the same time, you have so many academies, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and on top of that, you hear all these things. So what I thought I will do is that I'll spend a little time, although the subject is self-directed learning. Just now somebody told me that it is not going to be self-directed, it's going to be directed by many other things, as we have heard just before from the other speaker. So I will keep it low key, because I'm sure you're all thoroughbred learning professionals, you will get enough inputs from the various people. I've heard in the last 1 hour from 𝗏𝗏 and Pandian and the other gentleman, the lady there. I think I have learned a lot as a learner. So what I will try and do is that keep my ears open and keep my mouth very little out there in the open for the day. See, why I'm talking about context, because I think it's very interesting to know. Let me talk about our organization, because I've spent a long time with this company. We are an 83-year-old company, and I've been the CHRO for the information technology business, hydrocarbon business, manufacturing business. I've also worked in pharmaceuticals. In all these organizations, while I was leading the people function, while the last 6 months, I've been given this very interesting responsibility of leading the learning function for the entire 𝗚𝗏 group of companies globally. And interestingly, we have 3 large portfolio of companies. Each one is very diametrically different. The one group of companies which we have is all focused on manufacturing. The second group of companies all focusing on what we call as the projects and construction. The third group of companies all focusing on the services. Services, I guess most of you will be from the third spectrum here, in the classroom here. There we have the sister concerns of ours, the L&T Infotechs and Mindtrees and L&T Financial Services, L&T Technology Services, and so on and so forth. I don't want to dwell so much on this, because I'm sure there are enough people who will talk about those things, but I would like to talk about some of those long-standing businesses where how learning has a very important role to play, both in terms of getting, keeping, and making sure. I was walking out of the Bangalore airport, I was just wondering, I said it's a beautiful airport, then I realized that we only made that airport. I think when we walk in the metro, I thought we only made all these things actually. We are the builders to the nation. So how do we build people who can make builders to the nation? That's the journey which we are on, and continuously we start focusing on that aspect of it. So when you talk about organizational needs, so each one's needs are very different. Let me actually, if I go to our top management, they will say, we want to become from a $25 billion to a $100 billion corporation, and we will be in all businesses which you can foresee as we go forward. So where are the leaders? That is the question they ask us. Then we go to the immediate next level, a business leader, and ask me, okay, you are telling me to earn so many jobs, so many orders, make the largest metro, make the bullet train. Where are the technical people to do all these kinds of things? Where are the people? How can you build them? Then you go down to the individual learners. I think they are asking, where are the learning opportunities? If I learn something, where do I deploy it? Where do I use it? Where do I learn it? And what do I do with all these kinds of things? So these are all the questions, and you can actually look at it. Second part of it is technology. I'm sure the learning technologies, it's mind-boggling. I've been around in the business for a little while. So I can remember the days when there was only one PC in a department. And I mean, many of you wouldn't have been born at that particular time. And I'm sure you would have seen one PC and then people would do a coconut breaking for the PC. If somebody goes near that kind of a story. So where we have reached and how we have actually moved, whether it be the mobility, communication, the kind of deployment of computing that has happened and the learning how it has taken shape over the years, all these are phenomenal. I think that's something which, and interestingly, the learning technology, it is like somebody was telling me you can send an empty goods train. A goods train is like a vehicle, but what do you send on the goods train? What is the domain that goes on to goods train? What is the technology we are trying to teach to people? You go to my IT business, they will say, you know, what is the latest emerging technologies? How do we teach those things? If I go, yesterday I was in one of our technical engineering academies in Mysore. They said, sir, we need to establish one pre-stress testing lab. Why? No, sir, we are doing the bullet train job, which is a 25,000 crore job, which requires around 2 lakh people to be trained in how do you do pre-stress testing. How do you make all these columns, how do you make piles and so on and so forth. Somebody beautifully said about simulations. And like 𝗕𝗏𝗏, I think that's a lovely example you gave me. I think it really touched me because when you are dealing with such kind of immensely mission critical work, how do I create that kind of a talent where they can actually practice in a safe working environment and learn those kinds of skills. And very interestingly, I've realized that how do we do such big jobs in the middle of the night, all over the country, all over the world, then we require that how do we work on the safety of the people concerned, the safety innovation schools that we have. There are many of these things, how these kind of simulations are built in the real life world you create, the chocks of it inside our workplaces so that people can practice some of them. The learner needs and motivation. I am very interested. Somebody asked me the question. I was in Algeria some time back. We were doing a very massive hydrocarbon job there. And people work in the middle of the desert. And I don't know about Algeria, we say, I think the Sahara Desert, which you see out there. And when you work in that particular place, when they say they live in camps, and for long periods of time when they work there, you have thousands of people working there. Does learning stop then? What kind of a learning can you give to those people at that particular time of people? And number two is basically, what is the motivation for them to continuously learn? Can they find time to learn and how you take learning? I think there are fantastic technologies that have come in, which we are leveraging in a big way. How do we take learning to those kind of places? And the second part of it is that do people learn on their own? In fact, there's a question I asked about somebody left to themselves, what will people learn? I mean, you just leave. I think we have got actually a lot of these platforms like Skillsoft and Coursera's and I mean plenty of them which are there in the business. And if you leave, just let the people learn, what do they learn? And then suddenly somebody asked me this question, yeah, you have logged in some 55,000 man days of learning, you said. But what did they learn? He's not able to do the job well. This guy is not able to even speak properly when he goes into a forum. He's not able to deal with the customer well. He's not able to articulate anything which you can see. What is the learning that is taking place? And this is where actually I was just thinking, is self-directed can only be directed at all in the first place. I think I'll come to the self-directed part of it a little later because finally who is sponsoring all these things? Who is cutting the check for all these things? The organization is cutting the check for all these things while providing the learning. So what is the role of the organization and what does it want to fulfill in this particular learning journey that we would like to see? I just wanted to give a little bit of a glimpse of our learning ecosystem because when I talked about Larsen & Toubro, we have an L&T corporate university where we have actually 3 archetypes of leaders and various kinds of skills which we try to develop in the corporation. The one side of it is basically we try to develop the technical leaders that is required in the company. So that we have the technical academies which are all built around actually the various kinds of academies which we have for the railways, safety, innovation, CSTIs, construction skills, and all these are very, very vital. Please feel free to ask me the question later on, what do we do in a tunnel academy? We have a tunnel academy which has been set up. We are actually building around 8 metros in the country and 4 of them go underground. And how do we develop the skills that are required to make those things? We are making the hydel power projects in the north of India, in the extreme weathers of Himachal and all that. So make the tunnels through the whole thing, and we have a tunnel academy. How do we train people in all these kinds of things? And like we have a railway business, these railway corridors that we build, everything is technology driven, and at the same time, how do we take learning to the people in a fashion that they can actually learn, and not only learn, but deploy this learning on the jobs so that we are able to transform the landscape of what we are trying to achieve and deliver on the customer projects. The second part of it is actually the business leadership. Business leadership is very essential. Very interestingly, we keep talking about it. 7 out of the 9 board members of the company have joined this company as trainees. And we build leaders, we say, in addition to building the nation. And how do we build this particular thing? We have actually a very honed methodologies with respect to using development centers to identify the high potentials and making sure that we have a sustained leadership input that are shared with them. And we have a leadership academy that has been built 27 years back in the company. And it has been running almost around 700 to 800 programs a year for different kinds of leadership, behavioral and managerial subjects, both online, offline, blended, to make sure that the learning takes place in the corporation. And project leadership is another very important. We are basically project managers. Our job is project management. So how do we build project managers in an organization through the project management school? And very interestingly, we have a digital varsity called as ATL, which is actually churning in and churning out a whole lot of learning through the various learning interventions that we have built in the company. And we have centers of excellence, which are actually looking at how do we architect solutions for the new businesses in terms of learning. How do we create internal cases of the company to learn from one another? How do we ensure that the domain of the organization is consistently sustained? How do we interface with the ecosystem of the learning communities, the academic institutions, the startups, and various other research scholars to bring in the cutting edge of the technology into the corporation? So I think it's a huge ecosystem that is working on, and still the question continues to remain is actually how are we contributing with respect to the whole thing. So I think that goes with respect to what is the kind of an ecosystem which we have. I just thought I'll just give a glimpse of it because there is no easy solution. Like I can't describe this is one single solution. If I do it, this is going to work for each one of them. Like I think beautifully she said that if life was simple, when we started off, if there was A plus B is equal to something, we were very simply learning what is supposed to be done. But I think the complex decision making, the ambiguous world we live in, and the kind of solutions which we need to find as we go forward, and as the light keeps spreading out in front of you as you come out of the darkness in the whole thing. How do you do that? This is somebody, one of my colleagues gave me this, because I'm not very familiar with it, but I think I really like this. This is a gentleman by the name John Burson. I think you keep listening, or his podcast I've listened a few times. I like his podcast because he is like a little prognosis with respect to how things will be or what is the kind of a direction we take and move forward. But interestingly, what I was just thinking from the perspective of that, I've been in the business in '98, I've been in the business in 2020. So did it actually pan out this way? Because I think I was looking at it more from the perspective of e-learning in the year '98. And I wonder e-learning was there at all at that time, really, because none of these business, I think all these people weren't there at all. And what was the kind of e-learning we had? We had CD-ROMs, somebody had something to do with respect to that, and the kind of LMS e-learning platform, now we talk about LXP and so on and so forth. But I really liked what he said, the last one. I think that's a beautiful hologram coaching which you talked about. I think we are trying that hologram coaching in one of our sites at Algeria, because what we realized is that when you face the problem, you need help. And how do I provide the help across the time zones and where specialists are few and far between? And we realized that particular kind of a hologram coaching, that is, you ask for it and you get it at that moment of time, is so useful, and we realized that. You talked about that AR and VR. How do we use AR for safety training? When everybody walks into the sites, how do you give them that particular visualization of the working at heights in confined spaces? To each of the workmen, how do we give that kind of a thing using AR and VR? That's a beautiful way which we have realized is learning in the flow of work is something which I really like, because what he says is that learn when you need to do. Like typically one of the persons asked me the question, I'm going to meet a vendor just now. What do I ask him? Quickly you go to one of the Skillsoft videos about negotiation and you will pick up 4 points out of that. Keep these 2 points in mind, you can go there and then have opening the conversation, you can start it. I mean, then people started realizing that the snippets of learning, small bits of learning, the micro learning, I think the small videos of the learning, as you pick up that 1 or 2 items which will actually add to your domain knowledge, but bring in that kind of a flavor so you can take it forward kind of a story. I think we realized that's a beautiful way of actually, people are learning, the youngsters learn beautifully that particular way, and many of these things. As a chief learning officer, I realized that one of the main duties of mine is to how do I become a window to the world into the company? How do I bring in all those kinds of resources into the organization and make them available to the people so that they can use it in the learning, in the flow of the work, and appropriately and ease to use the technology, how we can bring about in doing that. This is very interestingly, I think let's come back to, I think since they told me to speak about self-directed learning, I thought I will do a little bit of self-directed learning. I'll come back to this, I think other parts of what I wanted to say a little later again. When we log in all these man hours, in fact very interestingly I realized that when we have a ATL Digital University. Once in a while when we do a review meeting, we ask them, okay, what did people learn? So they say that the junior supervisor is doing a lot of courses in strategy. So I was wondering, he said, why is he doing lots of courses on strategy? His job is to do the supervision or pour concrete or do something else. Why is he wanting to learn strategy? And where is the other person's learning? The people who have to learn are not learning that particular thing. And while we are logging in a whole number of man hours, I don't know whether you face these kind of challenges in the organization. While you have the numbers are logged in, but somehow it is not directed. If it is not directed, it will be fewer numbers alone, whether it is what the organization is looking for, or we need to get something better than that. And then we realize that while I can direct somebody, or at least create that kind of a learning space and ecosystem, there is still certain amount of guidance will be required for any kind of self-directed learning also. So what kind of a guidance? It's very interestingly, I realized is that, I think beautifully, I think he talked about skill, intelligence. I mean, how do you move from experience to skill intelligence? I think I started discovering this aspect of it because one of the presentation I heard from our L&T Infotech the other day is basically about how do we actually advertise the jobs within the company and how do you assess yourself against that particular job and how far away from your dream job are you, and based on the skills that you have and what are the skills that you don't have and how you learn those particular skills, evaluate yourself and become more and more closer to your dream job. I mean, it's a beautiful way of actually articulating that your life is in your hands, the dream job is well within your reach, and how can you actually get there and do that particular kind of a story. I think then you realize that that is a subtle guidance, what you call as nudging. I mean, you want to do something, you want to achieve something in life and you want to get somewhere, how you are going to give that little nudge to that individual concern so that this is possibly the way forward and then do that. The second nudge which we have seen is basically in our organization, as we said that we have got this horizontal academies called the Leadership Academy, the Technical Academies, then we have all the functional academies. The functional academies like your HR, finance, supply chain, you have different kinds of academies and each of the academies have the roles that have been described for that particular academy, and for each of the roles we have identified what could be your competencies and skills and so on and so forth, and what are the kind of graded roles which you have to move from one level to the other level, and then basically you are trying to put in front of the people concerned this learning. If you want to get ahead, if you want to do something, you need to get ahead, you need to learn some of these things, and how do you make some of the blended learning available to the people in that direction. And we are also trying to ask the managers, they are very important. The first line managers are the most harassed people in the companies these days. And if you go and ask them, if they see us also, they run away. Simply because they say that you give me 10 people in the department, 5 have not even come to the office, and 3 have newly joined whom I have never seen before, and out of that some have already left, and then you keep on giving me new people into the company and you keep saying that you engage them, you connect with them and then do all these kinds of things, and he is the most harassed fellow. And of course, expectations don't stop, and I'm sure all of you also expect from our line managers, people expect from all of you, so that I think the journey continues with respect to that. So we also expect him to do in addition to all these things, because the only solution, they say, to create an engaging workplace is to have great people leadership skills. Because the only person whom the employee interfaces with is manager. The rest of the company, in large corporations where you have lakhs of people, others are only names which you keep hearing or people's profiles which you keep seeing inside the newsman articles. Rest of the people are not known to the person concerned. How does that person play the pivotal role of being the people leader and guide that particular learning in the organization? That's a very important part. And diverse and active development experiences. I think the second one you realize, I think beautifully what I heard, and this is very similar to what we keep talking about. You learn something, but what do you do with learning? It reminds me of a very famous quote of a Chinese philosopher, Confucius. When somebody would have heard his name, I think he says there are three kinds you learn, get wisdom in this world. The first one is basically by reflection. That is supposed to be the noblest way. The second one is by imitation, which is the easiest way. I can imitate somebody and I can pick it up. The third one is supposed to be the most bitter, most painful, is through job experiences. And this is the third way, but how do I create the third part of the learning and create wisdom in the learning? By making those kind of experiences come to life in terms of whether we can create it offline through the gamification, through the simulation, through the laboratories, and various other methodologies by which you can create that kind of a space for it. And the feedback on insight on progress, everybody wants to know how am I doing. It's a very interesting experiment we did. I think this is a beautiful case which we have. We are trying to work on our communication fitness of our people, because our people are spread all over and they are all hard-working young people everywhere. And then we realized that our ability to interface with clients, our ability to interface with all the kind of stakeholders we interact with, our communication fitness need to be improved significantly. Whenever our CEO travels to different sites, yaar tum kya karta hai usko, I think he's not able to shake hands properly also. How does he talk to the client? No wonder client is asking us to do a lot of extra work and without giving me money, and so on and so forth. So we turned that we will do something on communication fitness, and we have interesting communication fitness. At a stretch we have covered around 2,000 people in that particular kind of a fitness, which is hyper personalized practice kind of a communication. And how do we actually check the progress of the person from one level to the other level, and what is the kind of an impact which you see on that kind of a story. And opportunities to practice. There are immense number of opportunities to practice in a growing company, and then where you get to learn these kind of opportunities as you go forward. Just to conclude, I think we have many of these things. We have actually the compliance courses, libraries, certifications, communication fitness, and so on and so forth. And we have a lot of more happening in the organization all the time, but ability to synergize all these things and make sure the organizational needs are fulfilled, and also making sure that the learner motivation and the learner's behavior is brought about the kind of changes that you are reason. That's the kind of a journey. It's a learning journey. It's not very easy, and I think the journey continues basically with respect to that. And I would like to conclude, I think, with Confucius again. Very interestingly, the beautiful word he said, it really touches me. He said, no man or woman has ever set the feet in the same river again. No man or woman has ever set his foot in the same river again. Neither the man, woman is the same, nor the river is the same. Because both are constantly evolving. The learning is evolving, organization is evolving, technology is evolving, learner is evolving. So in that kind of a scenario, how do we kind of generate the kind of a learning impact and the learning delivery which can meet the organizational needs? I think this is what I wanted to share, a few thoughts at this juncture. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Hope you found something useful in this particular spent time together. Thank you.